Evening, citizens. I I thought I'd drop an off-the-cuff video um, because I can't keep up with doing videos once a week. I'm just too busy, and it's it's getting to me a bit actually because I do want to keep getting involved because um, so many things are happening. But you know it's exhausting, isn't it? Fighting this bloody narrative all the time. Um, but the chickens really are coming home to roost now. What with all these 15-minute cities or low traffic neighbourhoods, which is their cuddly euphemism for preventing us, and restricting our freedom of movement. Um, and I touched upon on that in my last video about the Oxford um, scheme, and of course that's being replicated all over the place. Most notably in Bath and of course the ULEZ expansion in London, which of course nobody wants, but they're doing it anyway. And it does seem to be one of those curious things about our society now, is that things don't happen the way they're supposed to happen. And things are supposed to proposals are supposed to um, be gone ahead with when there is a sort of general agreement over that's what is supposed to happen from the population, from the voting public. And it seems that this rather old-fashioned notion has no sway at all these days, and just like every other institution, the institutions of local and regional government, as with the national government, are just efforts to sustain themselves, and so that people can have jobs in local government and things like that, rather than actually providing the best possible life for the citizens who pay for those people who sit in their jobs in local government. And of course, this is now the default position now, is that we're now told what's going to happen um, uh, rather than them enacting what they're supposed to do based on our voting patterns and our beliefs and desires and wishes and all the rest of it. And the with the LTN uh, um, with the LTN issue, I mean, it's a very uh, obvious case of we're being told what is best for us, and that is the thing that really gets my goat. It's the thing about democracy is that we are supposed to be in charge. I mean, we know that, of course, that now is a fiction. That isn't the case at all, but it should be the case. And in within sort of legislation, if you were to dig into it deep enough, you would probably find that still is the case. The fact that it isn't in practice is neither here nor there. But you see, the thing is, if we all wanted to drive at 100 miles an hour everywhere, and was having 15 pints in us all the time, and that's what we all wanted, and we all voted for it, then that's what we should get. It doesn't actually matter if it's bad for us or not. That's just it's a secondary consideration. It's even if things are bad for us, and driving cars in traffic jams on congested streets is almost certainly not particularly good for us. But it appears that that's what we want to do. And if we want to do that, we should be allowed to do that, whether or not it's bad for us or not. Now, obviously, a politician's job is perhaps to try to persuade us of certain things and persuade us to go down certain avenues. But it's not that. But they are exceeding their brief by instructing us and telling us that this is what is going to happen. I mean, those people from Oxford City Council released that video saying that we're not building a prison. There are no electronic gates. All there is are cameras that read number plates. So we're not going to stop you from going out of your neighbourhood, but we'll fine you if you do. So that's the kind of deal that we should be supposedly pleased with these days. And when I talk about chickens coming home to roost, that's because this is where the complete apathy and the ignoring of more and more and more surveillance has got us to. We've had so much surveillance now that people like those people in Oxford City Council think that this is just something that couldn't possibly be objected to. Cameras that read your number plates, who could possibly object to that? But this is where we are now. And this is where we are because nobody objected when the first closed circuit television camera went up in a public place. However many years ago that was, 30, 35 years ago, whatever it was. And nobody objected, and all the subsequent increases in surveillance have always been justified on the acceptance of the previous instance of surveillance. So closed circuit television cameras in public places, they were brought in, nobody complained. And then when they brought in automatic number plate recognition, if anybody complained about it, they said, well, you didn't complain about closed circuit television cameras, so why would you complain about this? And so the next thing gets in. And of course, as I've been boring everybody stupid about for longer than I care to remember, it is automatic number plate recognition, which is the biggest threat to our freedom of movement. Facial recognition is not a walk in the park either. That's by orders of magnitude much worse, because you don't even have to be in your car. But as we use our cars so much, it is in effect surveillance over our entire lives, and it's exhausting complaining about this stuff to no avail for so long to so many people. And it does get one down a bit. Nevertheless, as things have got to such a point, it does. You see, the thing is that the totalitarians, as David Icke calls it, the totalitarian tiptoe, they make small incremental steps towards their total control society. But each step is so small that nobody ever notices. And even if they do notice, it's it's calculated to be so small so as not to scare the horses. But what you've got now, and what is happening now, is that every so often, even though with those incremental steps, at some point they have to make the significant step, the next step, which can't be ignored, that you'd have to be blind, dumb and stupid not to be able to see it. And the low traffic neighbourhoods are that thing. And the ULEZ in London is all that, it is that thing. There comes a point they have to make a step large enough that anybody can see it. And so, quite hearteningly to me, quite a lot of people are being objecting to all these low traffic neighbourhoods, and objected to them on the basis of what they actually are. They are restrictions on our God-given right to move around our own country at will, which we've always had, and it's never been restricted, and now it is being restricted. I mean, it would have been nice if somebody had realised this a bit earlier, to be honest. But then I suppose in the same way that they never sorted out the sewage situation in London until the stink was so bad they couldn't sit in Parliament. So in that respect, normal people are no better than politicians. So there is a pushback now, and it is heartening because it is that they've made the significant step. COVID, they tried to, with smoke and mirrors, tried to cover it up with COVID when nobody was moving around as much. And thankfully, enough conspiracy theorists who've been saying this all the time, that we're going to have climate lockdowns and everything. They may have felt they were shouting into the wind, but it seems to be having an effect. And this is a hill that we have to die on. It is a hill that must be taken. It's going to be difficult. It won't be easy, because what do you do when they put a load of planters filled with earth at the end of your road? I mean, you can go and chop them up and spread all the soil everywhere, and then they won't be there the next morning. But they'll come back, won't they, the next time? And then they'll come back, and they'll come back with cameras, and they'll come back with enforcers and all sorts of things. And you can come and demolish them in the middle of the night if you want, and you can. And I think one of the key things is that people ought to bandy together with their neighbouring neighbourhoods, if you like, so that people can sabotage each other's. But I mean, it does appear that at least in this sense, that people are beginning to wake up about what's happening now. I mean, it's astonishing that it's taken something like this, even though this is something that means a great deal to me. To most people, it's not that much of an issue. But and I'm astonished that the state coming within a whisker of mandating a medical procedure, not only for yourselves but also for people's children. I'm surprised that wasn't enough. There wasn't enough. Wasn't more pushback then. But if people are prevented from their driving their cars about, then people are going to get quite upset. Now, I mean, I go on about cars and driving quite a lot, I know, and for regular viewers will know the reason that I do that is because I do genuinely think that cars, and to an even greater extent motorcycles, are the biggest symbols of personal freedom we have. And cars are as a sort of rare example that really have liberated people. Now, we don't always use our cars in the most sensible way, and the fact that we have so many bad traffic jams all the time is proof that we don't use them, properly, and we don't give enough thought to how we ought to use them. But cars were the way that ordinary people, were able to see so much more of the world, and to go to the coast and go into the countryside at a moment's notice, on a whim, if you wanted to. And that's a tremendous expansion in freedom that people didn't have before. I mean, before that, before cars, there was horses and there was bicycles. Bicycles actually are, they were one of the ways that um, you know, areas increased their gene pool, diversified their gene pool, because people didn't just stay in their village. And of course, in the days of horses, you had to be pretty well off to have a horse. But by the time bicycles came along, bicycles began to do what cars have done, for the past 100 years or so. And as we know, they don't want us moving around. They don't want us seeing the world on our terms and on our timetable. And traffic is a problem. I mean, they're couching it in terms of climate change, but I think we're beginning to bust that myth wide open now. But of more of an issue is congestion and just clogged up cities and towns. We all use our cars too much, and we probably ought to use them less. But the trouble is, what always happens is that they don't give enough attention and enough effort into persuading people to use their cars. There's a few posters here and there, and then what they do is say, well, that hasn't worked, we're going to have to use other means. And of course, their favourite means all the time, always, under any circumstances, is always more surveillance. And of course, surveillance is so useful to them because most people don't give a shit about surveillance. And yet surveillance gives them so much power, and surveillance coupled with number plates means that people will be able to be fined, quite easily for breaking the rules. And of course, what you then can do, of course, is that you can cover up your number plates. But the first people that cover up their number plates, they'll come down on them like a ton of bricks. So you're not allowed to cover up your number plates, and it won't just be fines and that sort of thing. They'll start confiscating your car. So you want to defy them, you might end up losing your car and having your car crushed, and that could be devastating, obviously. So they don't want us doing that. And of course, the other thing that's sort of simmering away underneath all this, of course, is this anti-human agenda. The people at the top believe the rest of us are just cattle, and that we need to be managed. And because another thing about the democratization of cars was that, and it's not often talked about, but it's there. And of course, I'm a sort of typical proponent of this, is that quite poor people can afford cars, and that gives them an awful lot of mobility, and it expands their life more than it would otherwise. But you've only got to go a couple of rungs up from very poor to really not very well off, and if you choose carefully, you can, so long, even if it's second or third hand, you can get yourself a really nice car. Still, and you can get your car if it's a few years old that it has quite high performance, or it has a very prestigious badge to it. And what that does, of course, is that means that you can you can give the impression that you are in a in a higher place in society than you might otherwise be. We could just call this prestige. We could just call this status symbols, and it's easy to sneer at that. It's easy to sneer at that. But if somebody, doesn't have any assets, any particular assets, somebody like me, for instance, you can at least have a nice car. So even if it's not the most expensive car or the newest car, you can still have a car which other people like and other people admire, and people come and talk to you about it and all the rest of it. And so it gives you a bit of status that you wouldn't otherwise have. And of course, that's another thing they don't like. And of course, the environmentalists always um, come in on this as well. And of course, there is that slightly, what would you say? If you were sort of upper middle class, you might say it's rather gauche uh, um, approach of having a car beyond your status, and to a certain person that's well, it's just a young bloke and he's got a nice car, he's saved up and he's always even got into debt to get it, and he's considered it to be worth it in order to have a nice car when he may not have very much else. And there are people, and I think these people are coming out of the woodwork now, the laptop class or the parasite class. They don't like people doing that because this is people not knowing their place. And there's a lot of this about, particularly in England. People must know their place. So, it's this, I suppose, is why there is now pushback, because people don't actually want to give up their cars. And they don't want to be told so they can't go here and they can't go there and all the rest of it. As I've said before, there's the problems of traffic do have to be dealt with, and I'd even be theoretically in favour of some quite radical solutions, so long as I knew that it wasn't the prelude to something else. And of course, I absolutely know that it is. So it's one of those things you can't give them an inch. You can't give them an inch. If traffic problems have to be solved, then they have to be solved, but not with more surveillance. And that's what they want to do. This is because surveillance is the perfect tool of control. And people have not realised that. And people just have not even noticed it. I mean, even people who are very much on our side of the fence, I find to be astonishingly naive and, sort of kind of ignorant about surveillance. As if it's, ignorant of its reach and also of the downsides of the concept of surveillance. As I've said before, the idea that somebody that I don't know and I have not given permission to know knows where I've been is unacceptable to me. And I don't think I'm a particularly deep thinker on this. I just think that I have, my thinking is just, half an inch thick, half an inch deep, rather than a millimetre deep. So, there is, we'll have to see. You have to see how these things go. They are having to make a significant step, and they've had to move up from the tiptoe because they've hit an obstacle, and now they have to make a significant step. And of course, the significant step is putting, wooden boxes at the end of your road and filling them with soil and saying road closed. And of course, that can't be hidden. That can't be hidden. Even if you never ever paid the slightest bit of attention to anything political at all, you'll notice that. And of course, these are the normies. These are the normies that have ignored everything else, who may very well suddenly be on our side. These people may, not necessarily the most principled of people, and we know how many people have revealed themselves to have no principles at all in the past 34 months. Most of them. And now somebody's saying you can't drive your car there. And suddenly they may very well be on our side. So that's an interesting conundrum for us. Because you may find yourselves on the same side with people you don't respect very much. But, I suppose whatever it takes, I suppose. But for your information, I've restarted my stall in my local town. I've done it twice now since the beginning of the year. And the first time and I don't want to have to do this. I have to force myself to go, and I do it for, the plan is to do it for 4 hours on a Saturday between 10 and 2. And I've tried to encourage people to come to it. And last time I did it, someone did come and help. And it was so much easier and so much more pleasant with the second person there. And we were only there for half the time because, ironically, I couldn't find a parking space, so I could only only be there for 2 hours rather than 4. But in that 2 hours, we did speak to quite a few people, and we were getting a good response. We was, and the previous time I did it, earlier in January, I spoke to, in 3.5 hours, I only spoke to 8 people, because I don't go up and get in people's faces. I have to let them come to me. But that was when I was doing it on my own. So I spoke to 8 people in 3.5 hours. 5 of them were basically on side. One of them was unconvinced by my argument, shall we say. I mean, it was perfectly pleasant and polite, but he was sceptical of my position. But the 2 people that were most valuable as talks were 2 people who had no idea what was going on, and seemed to be astonished by the things that I told them. And you see, these are the people that these are the people that are most, they're the most fertile ground, because they're open-minded, but not in a rude way, but they are ignorant because they don't immerse themselves in the things that we've immersed ourselves in for all this time. So, but I do believe that this is key. We have to get to the ordinary people, the normies. We have to get to them. Just do it. Tapping away on Twitter is not going to make any difference at all now. Anybody who, we found all the other people that think like us now. We found each other, and that's good. That's good. That's not to be dismissed. We found our comrades, and that's good, because in the early days of this, you kind of thought you were the only one. But now we've got to widen this. We've got to widen this to the ordinaries, the normies, and what's curious about this, of course, is that the catalyst for all this was was the so-called pandemic, the pandemic that almost nobody wants to speak about now. And you seem almost, to some people, you seem slightly obsessed if you want to talk about that, like as if, and because they all know it's all over. They all know it's all over, and and the government knows that everyone knows it's all over, even though, and they also probably know that they most of the people probably also know that it was all bullshit, and yet somehow the Houses of Parliament are not on fire. And this is the thing that just astonishes me, that how many things can happen like that, and nothing happens. They spent 500 billion quid on nothing at all, and now we've got 10-15% inflation. I mean, since before this began, my mortgage has more than doubled. I'm paying over £1,000 a month for my mortgage now, where I was paying something like 466 quid or something like that before this started. Energy prices are through the roof, as we all know, and this is all their fault. It wasn't because of the pandemic; it was because of the stupid and spasmodic and hysterical and fraudulent reaction to it. And like I say, every day I'm astonished that the Houses of Parliament are not on fire, and they really ought to be. But it's funny that as their whole worldview begins to be obviously false to the majority of people, they are becoming quite vicious in their opposition to us. I mean, it started with Andrew Bridgen, who's who's laughably being described as an anti-Semite by that fucking wanker Matt Hancock in Parliament. And of course he's dead there, and then they all sort of, oh yes, I believe, yes, that's quite right. And then of course now he's no longer a Tory MP, lost the whip. That didn't take long, did it? And now they're going after Neil Oliver. I mean, before I went to work this morning, I was looking on Twitter, and there was I think his name's Matthew Sweet, was started going on this. I think he's a fucking Guardian journalist or something. And his reaction to what Neil Oliver was talking about, because he was talking about globalists, he was talking about that it was anti-Semitic, the anti-Semitic, um, smear again. And and then when I came back from work and had another look, it seemed like it had all blown up since then. So this is what they do. I mean, to me, it sounds like they're rattled. It sounds like they really are rattled. And the thing is, when the viciousness with which Matthew Sweet attacked Neil Oliver in series of tweets this morning, it does make you wonder if, well, maybe I am a conspiracy theorist. Maybe I have blown it out of all proportion. It does make you think that for a bit. It does. And you think, well, fucking hell, maybe I am on the wrong side here. I don't know. Maybe I've got too hooked into this. But then you go away from it for a bit and you look at it logically and rationally, and you realise that you're not wrong. But it's telling the viciousness with which that we are attacked when it all starts to become obvious that they were the liars and they got it all wrong. It's curious. It's an interesting time to be alive. I mean, it's not interesting in a good way, but it's interesting, and it does, I mean, I have changed my opinion about the majority of people, and not in a good way, but I've also found an awful lot of good people that think as I do, and it's never the majority that change things. It's a determined minority that changes things. So it's an interesting time to be alive. I mean, if we get through this, if we get through this with our free society intact, we will look back on this time as being a very interesting time. And of course, if we don't get it back, we'll look upon it as it being even more interesting. But it's difficult sometimes. I mean, trying to grind through all this shit along with everything else that's happening. Like I say, I've got serious money worries. I've got a tax bill that I haven't been able to pay. I mean, it's fucking galling anyway that all I get for my tax is them putting up more surveillance cameras and sending all my tanks to the Ukraine. It's and there's no sort of leeway if you can't pay your tax bill. There's no leeway, even though Deems the Harvey seems to manage to sort of manages to sort of, omit the fact that you owed the revenue £3 billion, and it's just a few thousand quid for me, and and even I can't pay it, so there's a lot, that, so you've got your own personal stuff going, your own personal survivability, I mean, if there really is much more of a squeeze, I'll be one of the, I won't survive it. I will lose everything if it gets much tighter, And yet, I don't, as serious as that is, I don't, I think the loss of my free society is just 1,000 times more important than my own personal survival. If I haven't been a fantastic dad, really. I could say I've done my best, but sometimes that weren't good enough. And that I have a that's a source of shame to me, and I wish things had been different. I wish I'd been better. But I try to, if I can do anything for them, for my girls, that the thing that I probably can do, and the thing that I must do more than anything else, is I must do everything I can to ensure that their free society survives for them and for my granddaughter. And, hopefully I could be a better granddad than I've been a dad. Maybe I can do better in that respect. But, even if I was to, even if I was able to leave them £1 million each, you know, but left them without a free society, it would be, it's a completely empty victory then. If I can leave them with a free society, then they have a chance to make their way in that society. If I leave them with a society where, they have to live in pods in cities under 24-hour surveillance, they're not going to have any money. It won't matter if they have money or not. In a cashless society, what are they going to be able to spend it on? So we have to keep going. It is exhausting. But this is the burden we've been handed. This is our fight. Whether we chose it or not, it's ours, and we have to bear it. But they're getting desperate. They are getting desperate. I mean, the attack on Neil Oliver. I mean, Neil Oliver, this cuddly bloke from the coasting with all his long hair and his soft-spoken Scottish accent. And they're having a go at him as being an anti-Semite. He's fucking desperate. He's fucking desperate. They don't, they know that he's not an anti-Semite, and they know everybody else knows that he isn't either. But that's all they've got. The closer we get to the truth, the more vicious they'll get, because they're losing. We haven't won yet, and it might be a long time before we do, but they are losing. They're losing, and they will lose. We just have to do the right things. Talk to the normies. Okay, people, that's all for today, and I'll see you next time. Cheerio, and stay free.